Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Welcome tonight to tonight's town hall, hosted by our Congressman John Garamendi. I am John Lavalle, the Congressman's District Director. Welcome to everyone that's here. I hope you're fine. If you don't have water, water's over here. If you don't know what the facilities are, they're right out the door to the back of the hall. And before we start, ask everybody to rise, and we're going to do the pledge of allegiance. If you'll join me, I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce our Assemblywoman, Cecilia Aguilar-Curry, to introduce the Congressman.
Welcome, everyone. So nice to see such a great crowd because I was driving over from Winters a little while ago and I thought, well, I wonder how many people are going to be coming out on a Friday at 6 o'clock. And this is overwhelming. Obviously, we have so much respect for our congressman that you want to ask him some really important questions. He'll tell you what's going on in Washington, D.C. But I want to tell you that I've known Congressman Thompson. I mean, gosh, you got to be
Him too.
Congressman Garamendi for quite some time. He's done lots of great projects for our district, and particularly quite a few in Winters that I'm so grateful for all his work and his leadership. I was lucky enough a couple months ago to be asked by the Speaker of the State Assembly to go back to Congress and tell our story of what is important to Californians. And we went back and the Congressman sat and visited with us and shared what was happening in California and the nation. And what I came back from that was, number one, is that Californians are resilient. We will make the difference in this nation. So with that, I would like to introduce our Congressman, John Garamendi.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I do that with Thompson. Don't feel like I left out on you.
See, this is what happens, Cecilia, when you represent such a large area in which you have
6 counties.
6 counties, but 2 Congress
2
members.
congressmen, yeah.
You're so lucky. We can do all kinds of things, right?
That's exactly right. Thank you very much.
You notice? Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
Set? Let's go to work.
Let's go to work. You go to work, buddy.
Thank you, Cecilia. Great Assemblywoman. Thank you. Let's see, you're 7 months into it now. Yeah. I noticed you're taking care of the city of Davis there. Are you guys plotting some sort of funding program for the city? Our city councilwoman, thank you for joining us this evening. Well, here we go. Where to start? I hardly know where to start. I think one of the problems is we shouldn't be listening to television or radio or any other thing and just go into a cocoon. It is absolutely astounding what's happening in America at every moment. 5 o'clock West Coast time, 8 o'clock on the East Coast, breaking news. And it is breaking. It is just, you go, whoa, where's this all going to end? I'm going to hold on all of that presidential stuff for a while. If you don't mind, we're just going to put it to one side. I want to deal with some profoundly important issues that are actually in the Congress, the House, and the Senate, and spend some time with you on those issues. And then we'll undoubtedly be talking about Trump and the presidency and all of that, which is probably going to have some additional news before I get halfway through this hour and a half. So that's why I'll just hold that to the end. We can cover everything at the end. Some years ago, I came across, actually, it was maybe 20 years ago now, shortly after the Franklin D. Roosevelt Memorial opened in Washington, D.C. Patty and I were in Washington. I was the Deputy Secretary at the Department of Interior, and she was the Associate Director of the Peace Corps at the time. And the monument opened, and we went down to the monument, as did like a million other people. And etched into the stone at the various places were key sayings, speeches that he had given, things that he had done. How many of you have seen that monument? I mean, it's really, really, I don't know, it grabs you. But this grabbed me. And I kept this with me. I had it in my pocket for a long time, and I just say, well, I could memorize it, but then I'd like it up in writing. And I use this on the floor of the House of Representatives when I give a speech, as I do about every week. I take what they call a special order hour and talk about whatever the issues are that we want to push. But this is what I often start the discussion with. And it's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his inaugural address, January 20th, 1937. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. They were in the depths of the Depression at that time. Unemployment was probably 20% or even perhaps more. In certain parts of the nation, probably 50%. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. Most everything we do in Congress can be measured with those words. And recently, we would have, as a Congress, a failing grade against that criteria. You take a look at what has been done in Congress over the last 6 months, since the new 115th Congress went into session. The House of Representatives has repealed the Affordable Care Act that has provided insurance and quality opportunity for health care. Not that the health care is always available, because some places don't have the necessary doctors and resources, but at least the opportunity to get it. Has voted to repeal, and replaced it with a piece of legislation that would immediately put some 10 million people out of their health care policy, and in a decade, some 24, maybe 25 million people would no longer have health insurance. And simultaneously, in that same piece of legislation, provide nearly $800 billion of tax reductions for the men and women who are in the top 10% of the nation's wealthy people. It is the largest transfer of wealth in any piece of legislation ever in America's history. A transfer of wealth from the 24 million Americans that would lose their health insurance, and the thousands or hundreds of thousands of seniors that would lose their drug benefits, and the security that the Medicare Trust Fund would survive for about 12 to 14 more years. It is incredible. Measure that against Franklin Delano Roosevelt's criteria of...
It is astounding. It is astounding that in this nation, a majority of the House of Representatives would vote to physically harm people, because that is precisely what that legislation will do. Some of it immediately. It's not something that would happen someday, but for millions of Americans, the immediate physical harm by not having health insurance and the ability to get health care. That's what they did. Then the Senate decides that they would take up the same call of repeal and replace. And without one public hearing, not one, Zero, not a none. Without a public hearing, they commenced to work on a piece of legislation that was just as bad as the health policy. What are we to make of this? What are we to make of this? This is a policy agenda that has run amok in the most damaging of ways. But that's what they did in the House of Representatives. That's what they're still trying to do in the Senate. And it cannot happen. It must not happen. And I know that it will not happen if the people of America have the same energy that many of you in this room have to resist, to fight back, and to say, no, it will not happen. We can go into great detail about the tax cuts, about the fact that the 400 wealthiest families, 5 of whom are in the Trump administration, would receive well over $4 million tax reduction, minimum. Minimum. We could talk about it. We could talk about the lost benefits. We could talk about the elimination in the legislation. In a crafty way, they didn't come right out and say right into your face, oh, by the way, we don't care if you have a pre-existing condition. They didn't do it that way. They did it in a slimy, slippery way. They said the states can do that. I know what the states can do. And I know what the states were unable to do during the 16-year period between when I became insurance commissioner in 1991 and left that office in 2006. There was 8 years in between that I wasn't there. But in that period of time, we tried year after year after year to overcome the power of the insurance industry to put in place the essential benefit package and to outlaw and to eliminate pre-existing conditions. We were unable to do it. And I happen to know that the pressure on the state governments will be so severe that they will develop skinny policies. Now, the Senate legislation is much more straightforward. Mr. Cruz has decided that there would be skinny policies in the law. Policies that are absolutely guaranteed to bankrupt anybody that had any kind of a serious incident, from a broken leg to pneumonia and days in the hospital. We can thank Mr. Cruz for at least making it obvious and in the law. The fact of the matter is it would also destroy the insurance system. Because the young, healthy, what we call invincibles, the young, healthy invincibles will buy the skinny policy because they never expect to run their head into a tree in a bicycle accident. And the rest of the public would be faced with an ever spiraling increase in their health care premiums. Listen, this has got to stop. It has got to stop, and it's got to stop because across this nation, whenever one of my colleagues does a town hall, they're not faced with such a polite audience as you. And I'm grateful for that you're polite. I'm also grateful that those audiences are up in arms when their Republican Congress member visits them and tries to explain why they are purposely harming their constituents. So that's the health care. There's so many other things. I'm just going to touch on 3 other things very, very quickly, and then we're going to go to Q&A, which is what I really like to do. I want to thank all of you for being here. Even in the back of the room back there, I hope you can hear. Apparently, as I said, in the back of the room, and you got your thumbs up. Environmental legislation. 2 different tracks to basically destroy, roll back, and make ineffective the environmental protections that we have had for, well, since, what was his name? Nixon. Which brings me to Watergate, which brings me to the end of the subjects. Several different ways this is being done. One is a direct frontal assault legislatively. And we see that in many, many different pieces of legislation. Some of it is very obvious, sometimes it's subtle, but every piece of legislation in one way or another has some mechanism to limit, to remove, for example, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, or to limit the National Environmental Policy Act. In some way, just to carve off a little piece of that protection for our environment. That's one mechanism seen in dozens and dozens of pieces of legislation. The other is a more direct attack on regulations. The clean coal effort, which the Republicans, I know there's no such thing as clean coal, but this was an effort by the Obama administration to move the country away from coal-fired power plants. And it was working very successfully because at the same time, the price of natural gas had plummeted to a point where the economic equation between coal and gas was such that the industries are on their own, without the push of the legislation, moving to natural gas, which is far, far cleaner than coal. And simultaneously, all across the country, there's a major effort underway to go clean. Solar, wind, hydro, other kinds of power, some of which we have in our district over the geysers over on the in Lake County. So there's many, many different ways that we had moved the American economy to a cleaner energy situation. The Republicans are moving through a whole series of legislative efforts, and the Trump administration simultaneously eliminating those regulations that would protect the environment in each of those ways. The effort to clean up the coal-fired power plants, that's been pushed aside, and similarly with other pieces of legislation. The result of that is we're going to have much dirtier air. Just this last week, they moved a piece of legislation that would allow a higher amount of ozone. And somebody said, ozone, well, that's something, that's just oxygen, isn't it? With a few other things. But it's also called smog, and it's also a greenhouse gas. And but they did it, and it passed the Congress. It'll probably go through the Senate, pass there, and be signed. So there's just a whole major frontal attack on the environmental side of it in many, many different ways. Now, so that's the environmental side. On the other areas internationally, we have some real challenges on the international side of it. There's, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and we passed out of the Armed Services Committee over a $700 billion annual authorization for the military. Within that authorization was we're into the second quarter now, the second quarter of a rebuilding of our entire nuclear enterprise. All of the rockets, all of the missiles, all of the airplanes, all of the bombs, all of it is going to be $1 trillion over the next 25 years. And in my view, it is exceedingly dangerous. All of these systems are stealthy. They are much improved, much more precise, much more deadly, and extraordinarily expensive. That's not to say there isn't a place, given the world in which we live in, but we surely don't need to do what we are in the process of doing. And it has kicked off a new nuclear arms race. China and Russia are doing exactly the same thing, and then we don't even need to talk about North Korea in that context, because it's China, Russia, and the United States now, a trioca of, well, nuclear arms race. Nothing, there's no other way to describe it. I've been pushing back on that for the last 5 years, 6 years now, and with increasing success, because we've been able to provide a higher level of knowledge and interest among both Democrats and Republicans. Obviously more Democrats than Republicans, but nonetheless, many more members of Congress are going, well, wait a minute here. Exactly why are we doing this? What's the purpose? And so I'm going to continue doing that. It's a long slog. It's not an easy one, but nonetheless, we must do it. So those are 3 areas. Now, I want you to get ready with all of your questions. And I think we need to do this in a way that you are on a microphone. I think there may be some microphones around. And so as they begin to limber up for the microphones and watch the hands that are coming up, those of you that were coming in while I was taking pictures outside with a group of extraordinary young men and women who are my interns, about 9 of them, most of them from UC Davis. There's a couple of interlopers there, but nonetheless, we really enjoy these interns. They really work hard. They're called our civic engagement, and they really spend 3 months, usually about 3 months, working with us. The thing that I like most about it is that all but 2, well now 4, all but 4 of my staff and all of the staff in Washington were interns before they got a job with me. And so it's a good way for me to find out who's really good, and it's a good way for them to, well, not all of them get a job, but many of them do. Not making promises, guys and girls. Okay, you ready? I'm pleased to hear that. They're always polite when they call. I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you very much. Okay, where do we go first? I'm going to start there. I'm going to go 1 here, 3rd row back there in the pink, and then I'm going over here to the gentleman. You came in late. Sorry. Put your arm down. Okay. I'm going to take the gentleman behind you. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to go back to the middle, and then back to the far side, and come back to the front. All right, here it is.
Congressman, I have a question for you.
Sure. That
I feel like we need to ask all of our elected officials and even people that are considering running in this day and age. My question is, would you accept information or support from a foreign power as research or opposition research for any campaign or any project that you have in place? I apologize for that.
No, that is illegal. Right here. If you're going to... Okay, you got the mic. Okay.
All right, I would like to talk to you about what I think is one of the most direct attacks on the First Amendment that I've seen introduced in Congress recently. It's basically criminalizing protests, economic protests, making it both, impose civil and criminal fines and possible jail time if you use your economic power to express your opinion. And what really shocks me about this is that it is co-sponsored by 63 Democrats. The House bill is co-sponsored by 63 Democrats. It's the House Bill 1697, and it's called the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. And I would like to hear your opinion on, not on the Israel issue, but on the First Amendment results of this bill.
Is my name among those 63?
It is not.
It is not. It is not because of the First Amendment issue. The way the bill is drafted, and I think many of my colleagues listened to the top line without reading the legislation. And I think if they had read the legislation, they probably would not have signed on. There clearly is an issue with Israel and boycotts and so forth, and I'm concerned about that. But the way the bill is drafted, it really is an attack on anybody that's engaged in a peaceful protest or demonstration or even a town hall. And so $1 million fine.
Well, I think it said minimum of 250,000.
Oh, a minimum of 250,000. Yeah, so the point of the, that is but one example of the First Amendment being seriously trampled on. I said we'd save Trump to the last half hour, and I'll do that, but I do want to come back to this. And I'll just simply say here that during the Watergate period, the attack on the press was exactly the same as the current attack on the press. Fake news, so on and so forth. Okay? No, you're right back there in the break. You're going to have to wait now. Yes.
Well, I have two questions and one comment about your quote there.
Yes.
How come the American can afford $700 billion in U.S. defense, and they flush down the toilet I have a disability, and they flush down the toilet millions of dollars from the Little Act, and that is not cool. It's not okay. And I'm here representing the people who A, have disabilities, and B, the people who work for them, because the people who work for them, they get paid total shit. They don't get paid. I'm always wondering, how come they can afford $700 billion in defense, but they can't afford $1 to increase our rights or increase the pay so we get better stuff?
Very, very good point. I tell my colleagues whenever I get a chance, I said, our job in many, many ways is to make choices. It really is. Vote yes or no, choose to vote on that, or to sign on that piece of legislation, choose to fund something or not fund something. So we make choices. And this is what I was talking about when I mentioned the nuclear enterprise and the choice that is being made to spend $1 trillion over the next 20 years or so on that particular choice. Now, the specific issue you raised has to do with the choice between a $700 billion defense budget and cuts to the social services budget, social welfare, social services, mental health, and the like. That's a bad choice, and it's going to come to a crunch next week in the appropriation process, and they expect to have three, maybe four appropriation bills on the floor next week. Those bills will display the choice. It has the two military bills, some of which, much of that military is very necessary. It also has, that's the military construction, as well as the general military Department of Defense. It has the veterans, and it has Homeland Security. These are all the four appropriation bills that people say you got to vote for them. Homeland Security, and I know some of you want to talk about ICE, and I'll come to that in a few minutes. But that Homeland Security is the Coast Guard. It's a lot of other things. Military construction, and veterans. So they bring those four bills forward first, and they'll pass. So that a choice decision is not readily before the Congress. The social service programs, ranging from SNAP, the food stamp program, to social services, mental health, on and on. Medicare is under attack in the health care repeal. So we will not see these relevant choices at the same time. Very, very sneaky way of getting the military and these other things funded. Leaving at the end a very small pot of money for the other programs. Now, you mentioned the Letterman program. That's a state program. And I know that Cecilia's will be working on that one. The Letterman Short goes back, I think I was there in 1974 as an assembly member. I think that's when the Letterman Short Act passed, and that was the Mental Health Act that set the stage for mental health programs in California. So anyway, that's at the state level. But the same issue comes up there. Okay, let's go halfway back the room. Nobody's raising their hand over there in the middle. There's the lady halfway back in the room. I know you got this physics thing here, and you've redesigned reality. There's a lady right there. Yes, she's in that lavender. I'm sorry, both of you. Okay.
I'm worried about people's ability to vote. I worry about the Voter Fraud Commission, which seems like a voter suppression commission, and I'm worried about gerrymandering. And to the latter, I'm wondering if you will support H.R. 711, the Fairness and Independence in Redistricting Act.
I think there are about 4,000 bills introduced thus far. Read the title to me again if you have the microphone still.
It's the Fairness and Independence in Redistricting Act. It would ensure that district lines are drawn like
Yeah, I think I signed on to that one just this last week as a co-author. It basically, you may not have heard the question in the back of the room, so it has to do with voter fraud, the question of voter fraud, the question of fairness in elections, and then you move to another issue which is a little different, and that's gerrymandering. Okay, so let me take the voter fraud first, and then the gerrymandering at the last. It's interesting that I think the new press secretary for the White House raised the subject again today of the size of the audience at the inaugural. And also raised the issue, if I recall correctly, the issue of the vote count. The 3 million votes that Hillary Clinton had more than Trump. I think he raised that issue again in his very first presentation. Scaramucci.
There's a woman now.
Anyway, the establishment of the vote, I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but the voting commission that had its first meeting 2 days ago is itself a fraud. It is designed to do one thing, and that is to somehow try to prove that there were 3 million illegal votes across the United States. There is not one state voter election, person responsible for the elections in any state that has found anything other than minuscule voter fraud. Minuscule meaning in the nature of 10, 15, 20. It's just not there. Secretary of State Padilla was in Washington, D.C. Wednesday of this week. He's part of a counter commission made up of secretaries of state from around the nation who are holding hearings at the exact same time that the President's Commission is holding hearings and following them around the nation. Good for Alex. He's doing a great job pushing back. So there was being a member of Congress, you get to attend some really interesting meetings. So I'm going to share with you for maybe 90 seconds. There's every, 60 days or so, there's a dinner at the Library of Congress, which features an author of a book. We're working our way through the presidents. Meacham on Jackson, and so forth. So they're really interesting. And there's a chance it's bipartisan, and you get a chance to sit down with the Republicans. It's really good. You get to share some time together. Anyway, this last one was on civil rights. And the fellow that was speaking said, had written the book, said that it's not about the opportunity, it's not about, I'm just trying to put this in the right context, it's not about voter fraud. And it's about making sure that everybody who is eligible to vote can vote. He said that's what Martin Luther King was trying to accomplish. And we've got a long way to go. So what was the first thing that happened? Not the first thing, one of the things that happened when the Republicans gained control? They took a series of efforts to make it difficult and in many cases impossible for people to vote. Voter ID cards, so on and so forth, a whole series of things. That struck me very, very directly, that in his interpretation of Martin Luther King's work in civil liberty and civil justice, it was about being able to vote. We got a long way to go. The Supreme Court has not been helpful on this. Now, with regard to gerrymandering, California has a commission now. And I believe that piece of legislation that you described sets up requires that every state have a commission similar to Californians. And so it takes the issue of districts out of the hands of those of us who have a very, very powerful interest in the nature of our district. And you can see this in other states, no longer in California, because it's all done by an independent commission. But in other states, it is going to be very, very difficult for members, both Democrat and Republican, to lose because the districts are stacked either democratically or Republican. Now, it turns out that in most cases, the legislature and governors of the majority of the states, I think over 30 states, were Republican controlled, and they stacked the districts in such a way as to guarantee safe Republican seats. And then they left the other for safe Democratic seats. In other words, they impacted and compacted the districts. We've got to have this. Got to have it. Okay, in the back of the room.
Thank you for coming. I have a general question.
Sure.
Perhaps you have a general answer or an anecdote or two. My question concerns what drives Congress to vote as it does in the House. Questions in two parts. There's one side of the aisle, there's the other side of the aisle. Let's just talk about the other side of the aisle for a moment. Let's focus on key issues such as FDR in his statement and how that divides things. My question is, why do the votes come out as they do? Is it because the people in Congress believe in what they're voting for? Is it because they're driven by the leadership of Congress or the executive leadership? Or is it because they feel it's what their constituents want them to do?
Very, very important and very interesting question. One that's really difficult to answer because you got about, in Congress, 435 different circumstances. In the Senate, another 100. You mentioned three different factors, if I recall. Leadership, ideology, constituents. All of them are in play all of the time. First of all, ideology. The Republican Party tends to be what we call conservative. Low taxes, no taxes, small government. Okay, just very broad. Democrats, on the other hand, I'd like to say we're interested in making sure that there are good jobs, better wages, better skills, address the issues for those who are unable to really compete in the society for any number of reasons. I think that's where we're basically coming from. You know, better jobs, better skills, better wages along the way. That tends to divide the two houses, left and right. It's interesting, where did the issue the left come from, or the right? The next time you look at the State of the Union, you're looking from behind the members, and so you have audience left, audience right. You look the other way, stage, left, Democrats, and the right, Republican. So in any case, the point here is that party leadership and party discipline plays a role in both caucuses. The Republican caucus is made up of the German Bundestag, the Israeli Knesset. You do not have a majority party, you have a coalition party. Republicans are really a coalition party right now. You've got the Tea Party faction, they call themselves the Freedom Caucus, and then you have the more traditional Republicans. That's a coalition. They generally find common ground in small government, no taxes, low taxes. Democratic Party is more unified now than it was 8 years ago. The part of the Democratic Party that was more conservative disappeared, largely because of the redistricting, the gerrymandering that took place. They lost that, so the Democratic Party is more unified. Another factor that is driving votes is a new verb in the American lexicon.
Covfefe.
That's not the one I was thinking of. The new... I think I'm going to lose control here. The new verb is primaried. And so this primaried issue, if you're listening to the cable news, both sides, whether it's Fox or CNN or MSNBC, this will come up in different words, but it always comes back to the primary. Not too much on the Democratic side, although we're seeing some more of it, and we'll probably see more of it in the next election. But on the Republican side, the primary has become the defining point for the Republican members of Congress. And they are being attacked on the far right. They're being primaried on the far right, which tends to push the entire Republican caucus more and more conservative. The same thing in the Senate. If you're watching the Senate, the U.S. Republicans that are at risk in the U.S. Senate, it comes down to this point. Will they have an even more conservative primary opponent? And that's forcing the Republicans further to the right. And now we're beginning to see the same thing on the Democratic side, and some of you are involved in this, I suspect. You'll begin to see the Democrats being pushed further to the left. Now the result of this is the gap in the middle has become very, very large. There's political scientists here, I'm sure some of them have studied this, and it's been shown that over the last 50 years, the middle, which was occupied by the great majority of the members of the Senate and the House, the Republicans on the right side of that middle and the Democrats on the left side of that middle, has moved very, very far apart, and there are very few in the center anymore. And that comes back to legislative inaction. Now, when the Republicans control both houses and the presidency, where are my interns? I'm giving them a political science thing, and most of you are political scientists. Well, you want to be. Pay attention. I'm going to quiz you later when I get back to the office. But what's happened is that as this primary movement has taken hold across the American political spectrum, it has forced both sides to the outside of their turf, making it difficult to find the middle. And that's really where we are today. In And this is made even more difficult for the Republicans. And this is, has been seen on many different pieces of legislation. It also opens an opportunity. Oh, this is really into the weeds. You really want this kind of political science lesson? Okay, we're getting into the real weeds here. Okay, here we go. Just a couple of examples. The leadership of the House is selected, as it is in the Knesset, by the majority of the members seated in the Knesset or the Parliament, or, and the same thing in the British Parliament now, or in the Congress of the United States. Republican, right? Well, the Republicans is a coalition. That coalition is 195, 200 members of what you might call traditional conservative Republicans, and 30, 40 Tea Party, Freedom Party Republicans, far right. So it comes time for legislation. The leadership, Ryan and his leadership, is faced with a conundrum. The Republican, in order to do a Republican-only bill, that's 218 votes, they need 20 Freedom Tea Party members. If they don't have them, the bill won't pass. They could come to the Democrats and put together a compromise, a Democrat, Republican, and pass legislation. However, a fellow by the name of John Boehner did that too often. He couldn't get the votes of the Republicans because of this very conservative faction. Came to the Democrats. We put together all of the spending bills in the previous years. All of the major legislation in the previous years were more Democrats than Republicans. Boehner was the only way he can get legislation passed. He did it one too many times, lost the majority of his caucus, and retired. This is Paul Ryan's problem. He will lose, he stands to lose his speakership if he deals with Democrats, because that far-right faction will pull their support, and he will not have a majority that he needs to maintain his speakership. So you want to know into the weeds what's happening? Thanks for the question. Now, heads up for my interns, 7 of whom are political science students at UC Davis. I'll be in the office a little later in a couple of weeks, and we're going to have a test. Okay, the far back of the room. That was the gentleman. Let's go over here to the far right. Myra, no, we're looking at the audience.
Hi, my question is about the ESA.
Wait a minute, where are you? Stand up. There you go. The ESA?
Yeah, it's being gutted.
Do we know what the ESA is?
Endangered Species Act.
Thank you.
And I'm concerned that this is being voted on by politicians as opposed to scientists. And I'm wondering why, or what you can do to influence your colleagues to realize that that's a dangerous move, because we're losing a lot of our endangered species, and this is about to be gutted completely.
I think there's 2 parts to your question. One part I got into when I was talking about the environmental legislation and the rollback of regulations by the Republican Congress and Senate, and it does involve the ESA chipping away at it in many different ways. And so that's legislatively. I think the other part of your question really goes to the issue of science and the role of science in the government. The Trump administration has really undertaken a major assault on science. And this is found not only with endangered species, specifically with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries from the Department of Commerce and the Department of Interior and the Department of Commerce, where they are in some very, very direct ways removing scientists from their work. A recent example, yesterday's Washington Post had an op-ed. You read it. A career scientist in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Service working on the effect of climate change on Alaska villages on the North Slope of Alaska and getting them prepared for having to move. Ice is melting, permafrost is melting, and the ocean is coming, and they're going to be wiped out. He's been spending, I don't know, a decade or so on that. The Secretary of Interior said, I'm not going to fire you, but I'm going to move you to a new job. He is now an accountant in the oil and gas accounting department. So that was a blatant example, and it was a big op-ed, and I see you've read it. Physics across his t-shirt. But that's one example. There are many, many others across the government. Silencing. There was a question here earlier about the First Amendment. Really not applicable in government, but we want to have the scientists be able to speak clearly. The other comes in the appropriation issues. We were talking here, a significant reduction in science research, one of which I don't think is going to happen, but the Trump budget proposed a $5 billion decrease in the National Institute of Health research. Now that's a serious problem for Davis, because a lot of research from the National Institute of Health is done here. The Department of Agriculture also took a smaller hit, much smaller hit. National Science Foundation, major hit. These are all funding mechanisms that fund research at the University of California, Davis. And so I know the university here is pushing back hard the various science programs from healthcare to physics. You're right in my mind right there. Why don't you stand up so they can see what I'm looking at? Look at that t-shirt. So all of that's going on. So this is part of the attack on science. It's the muzzling of the scientist. It's the removal of science funding in various different ways. Okay, we're going to go right here, gentleman in the black. It says,
is there any good news?
I guess that was the question. The question was there any good news? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes, there is good news. And it's found right here in this room. I mean, it's 100 degrees outside. It's Friday. It's 6 o'clock Friday evening. Patty says, you're doing what on a Friday evening? They're not crazy. They're not going to go come to listen to you. But you're here, not, I think, because of me, but because you are engaged. You're engaged. You're riled up. You're concerned. And you are just a small, not a small audience, but you're a small portion of what's happening all across America. So the really good news is that the American public is really paying attention and very, very active. Patty and I go back a little ways. Like we were there in the 60s when all of that was going on. None of you are old enough to remember that, I know. Okay, some of you are. But we remember those days. We marched in Boston. I was at Harvard Business School at the time, and we marched in Boston down to the Boston Commons where we thought there were, I don't know, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 people. And it was a big, big anti-war march. The civil rights were going on and so forth. And then the day after Donald Trump became president, there was the Women's March in Washington. How many of you were there? Whoa! and this put every other rally and march to shame. And Mr. Trump hasn't really talked about the size of that march much. It was incredible. But that was spontaneous. It happened within a very short period of time. The word is organic, meaning it came from all of you. And it was an extraordinary statement. And the thing that is even better than the size and the intensity and the emotional, the emotion, I mean, it was just doggone emotional, is that it hasn't died out. It hasn't died out at all. All of the pundits said it's going to die out. It didn't. Now, I'm going to do something because this lovely lady here is about ready to kick me the next time I walk by her, unless I give her the microphone so she can ask some question. Did you have your hands up? Oh, you were just waving. You had your hands up. Okay.
Thank you. So I have actually a comment and a question. The comment, so when you were here last time, I actually wrote an editorial afterward asking you to be bolder. And it seems like you've been bolder, so I just wanted to thank you for being bolder. And that's really what we want from you, right? We want to hear what are you going to do. And so my question has to do, you were talking earlier about why do people vote as they do, and but you didn't say anything about corporate money. And so I want to hear, how do you feel about corporate money? How are we going to reduce the influence of corporate money in politics?
Yay.
Did you all hear the question about the influence of money, particularly corporate money? But that's not the only money. It's the extraordinary amount of money that flows into politics these days. You talked specifically corporate money. We got this problem. It's called the U.S. Supreme Court and Citizens United.
Yeah.
That's the law of the land. A corporation has equal footing with you and me in funding campaigns. There's something else to worry about here, is that it's possible, and there's a long history. Do we have any constitutional scholars here? Good, then I'll go ahead and opine. There's a rather long history. I think it dates back to the very early days of the of our nation, of the role of a business or a corporation vis-a-vis an individual. And should a business have rights same as or equal to an individual? And it's gone back and forth, but right now, with Citizens United and some other decisions that have been made by the current court, probably the last decade, corporations are gaining more and more equality with individuals. That's a real problem, because that then leads us to corporations funding campaigns. So what to do about this? Our opportunity to do something about this was impeded by the election of Donald Trump. It was a 5-4 decision that created Citizens United. It could just as easily be a 5-4 decision that would undo it. And there's many in the opinions, the counter opinions, reason to believe that it could just as easily go the other way. The problem is, we will be faced with a conservative court for some time. And so what I thought would be our best hope of dealing with this corporate role, equating corporations to individuals, isn't going to happen through the Supreme Court for some time. Too bad. Can we do it by law? Not really, because we got a Supreme Court decision that says they have the right to do it, and that's that. Can we do it with a constitutional amendment? The answer is yes. I know, you're shaking your head. Oh, there's a lift. Can you do it? Yes, you can. Will the public support it? I think the public would. Would the state legislatures support it? 3/4 of them? Not today. Would the Congress pass it? Not today. There are 4 constitutional amendments in the House of Representatives today. About once a month, somebody comes to me with a new way of writing a new amendment that would deal with this. Most recently, Wednesday of this week. Interesting, some attorney out of Los Angeles is going to change the world. My attitude is keep going. Just don't stop, keep going. And he wrote up a constitutional amendment. It was actually pretty good. It dealt with some of the problems that the other constitutional amendments have. Anyway, the answer is we're stuck in the short term. Now, things change. And we've talked about your power and your power being replicated throughout the United States. So change is possible. Okay, I'm going to go back to the far left corner. Now, 2 of you back there are sitting side by side. Why don't the 2 of you get together with one question? Did the 2 of you get together?
Together, but not together.
Congress.
My name's Ruben Ravelo. I'm a resident Davis, originally from San Francisco. I don't have as much information as you have access to about the Delta Tunnels California Water Fix story. I know that you have some ties to the region and that you are opposed to it. Looking over the information that I saw, I'm not opposed to it. And I would ask that you reconsider your position on the issue. Our governor is for it. Many newspapers are for it. Other members in the legislature are for it. It constitutes the best fix to screen fish and prevent the negative effects of the powerful delta pumping. I personally believe that putting 30 miles worth of tunnels 150 feet under the ground is going to do no more damage to the delta than the channel does to the English Channel. We have a very narrow window of time. In 20 years, we've gone from 1 million smelt to the 1 or 8 endangered fish we catch each year. And opposition to the delta tunnels is preserving the status quo, and the status quo is the delta is dying.
Okay, enough. I want to just shorten the debate. You gave a reasonable description. You left out one thing. And that is that the tunnels are sized to carry 15,000 cubic feet of water per second, correct? Presently, the plan calls for 3 intakes with a capacity of 9,000 cubic feet of water per second. Okay? The Sacramento River, 6 months of the year, on an average year in and year out, wet years, dry years, so on and so forth, flows somewhere between 12 and 18,000 cubic feet per second. Okay? Now, therefore, the tunnels are an existential threat to the Delta because they can take all of the water. Would they?
Yes.
No, they won't, because we have the environmental laws that will prevent them from doing that. Really? 3 times, most recently this week, the House of Representatives voted to override the national environmental laws that would prohibit those tunnels from taking all of the water. And not only that, override the state of California's Constitution and all of the water authority that the state of California has with regard to the transfer of water through those tunnels. Therefore, the only impediment to the existential threat is the will of Congress and the pen of the President. Consider for a moment your argument in the context of the current Congress and President. And I say, don't build it, because they will someday use it. I understand very good and well. I I understand very good well the argument you've made. I've been fighting this thing for 40 years. 40 years I've been fighting this concept of a tunnel or a canal. They do the same thing. Don't go there. Is there a solution for the Delta? The answer is absolutely yes. Is there a solution for California's water systems and water future? Absolutely yes. And I want to thank most of you in this room because most of you voted for Proposition 1, the water bond, $8 billion. What does that $8 billion for? Conservation, urban agricultural conservation. The single biggest source of water is conservation. Secondly, reservoir capacity. Okay? In-stream reservoirs, very troublesome. Off-stream reservoirs, we could do it. I'm a supporter of Sites Reservoir just to the north of here that would provide significant benefit to the environment and to the economy and to water supply. Thirdly, underground aquifers. The reservoirs, the underground aquifers in Southern California have a greater capacity than Shasta Reservoir. Are they used? No. Why? Because they're contaminated. Have you heard of recycling? We have the technology for recycling today. And it's being used in that most conservative of counties, Orange. Good for them. They're doing a great job. And Sacramento also is now putting in a major recycling program. So, there are solutions. The Delta. Did you know that under the current water fix plan, there are 2 ways to deliver water to the pumps? And by the way, there's no storage capacity south of the Delta to take 15,000 cubic feet of water for more than a month. There's no place for it. You got to build the storage south of the Delta, and there's not a nickel of water storage south of the Delta in the water fix program. Not a nickel. And there's not a nickel for the plumbing system that has to be used together with the tunnels, assuming the environmental laws stay in place. And what is that plumbing system? It is the Delta levees. More than 3/4 of the water delivered to the pump under the California water fix goes through the levees, and not 1 nickel to protect the levees. This is incredible stupidity on the part of those who are proposing the water fix. Let's move on.
In the states that Trump won, he didn't get a higher vote than Romney. The problem was the Democrats either voted for the independent people or they stayed home. Now, how does the Democrats have to change the message?
I suppose you all heard that. This is called forensic science. First of all, the nature of the campaign, not the nature of the candidate and the message, but the nature of the campaign and where the campaign spent time. Hillary Clinton didn't go to 2 of those 3 states in the last 2 months of the campaign. That's a campaign decision. Had she gone, would that have been worth 10,000 votes? Maybe. I don't know. So there's that question of the campaign itself. What were they focused on? Also the message, which is where you're going. The message got diffused and confused, and we're almost into we're well into the last half hour, so we're going to go to the campaign and Trump here in a second, in the next, well, we're going to get there now. Having said all of that, the Republicans are extraordinarily clever and disciplined. I've said 3 times here tonight what their message is. It's been that message since Ronald Reagan. Low taxes, small government. And that's been their brand, and they're very, very successful at it. And certainly Trump played that very, very well. The Democrats, Hillary had over 200 policy positions, and so a lack of focus on some central issues. I said earlier, what is the Democratic, as I think it all about? Better jobs, better skills, better wages. For the working men and women of America. Deals with a whole set of issues. You can go into each one of those and pull out specific programs. Environment's got to be part of that. Better jobs, environmental jobs. The biggest job growth, well, not the biggest, but one of the major job growths in California has been clean air, clean water, clean energy, okay? Infrastructure, okay? Some of which I just talked about here in the question of the Delta tunnels. So those are kind of where we are, what we need to do, and pay attention to that. Will we be better at it as Democrats? I sure hope so. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay, in the back of the room. Yep. UC Davis t-shirt helps.
Thank you. UC Davis Mathematics. Thank you for coming here, Congressman Garamendi. My number one political issue is healthcare. It's very personal to me on many levels. Before the ACA was passed, insurance companies were allowed to prevent people like my sister from getting health insurance because of their pre-existing conditions. So I'm grateful to the Democrats because of this, but I'm also well aware of the many flaws that I believe Obamacare has. I think Obamacare was a step forward for health justice in America, but I don't believe it goes far enough. I think the economics are simple. If healthcare is entrusted to a for-profit industry, I'm speaking, of course, about the health insurance industry, then there's little profit incentive to care for people who do not have the means to pay for their services. These are the people who need the most assistance, not the least. And FDR would approve of what I just said. Here's my question. Do you believe it is possible for a progressive healthcare plan to exist in the current framework, in particular the for-profit framework?
Single payer.
I thought you would end all of that with 2 words.
Single payer.
You said it, single payer.
Much better than ours.
Those of you that know my history know that in 1991, when I became insurance commissioner, I launched that campaign and that tenure as insurance commissioner with a single-payer, universal health care system for California.
What happened?
We did that in 1991, and it actually went to Governor Pete Wilson's desk, and he vetoed it. And that was that. There have been several attempts since then, most recently one today. Today's is, I wish they'd gone back and read what we did in 1991, because it was a complete plan, and it was paid for. Here are the things that I think we need to keep in mind in any system, whether it's a private business or a government program. It's got to be effective for health care, making sure that people are able to get the health services that they need. Efficient, okay? And effective. That's effective. Efficient, that it is done at the least cost. Okay? Fairly simple. You made an indictment of the for-profit private health insurance system that we have. You're accurate. It's correct. You've got profit, you've got commissions, sales commissions, you've got advertising, you've got every other thing. You add all that up and it becomes a significant portion of the premium cost, somewhere between 15, 20, some cases even higher. In the Affordable Care Act, there is a requirement that a percentage, I forget the exact percentage, it's like 65%, 70% of the total premium be spent on services. Well, that means 25, 30% is not spent on services. That's the inefficiency in the system. Now, I said in 1993, after Hillary Care went down, I said, let's look at Medicare. Very interesting. I know I'm going to hear this in the next campaign. Are you for a government health care plan? Yes. I'm over 65. I'm in the government. And I love those super conservative Tea Party folks that say, keep your damn hands off my Medicare. Damn government hands off my Medicare. It works. It's very, very efficient. The money is collected not in a premium, it's collected in a tax. You can talk whether the tax is fair, too much, too little. That's a good debate, and it's a fair debate. But it's a very efficient way to collect money. Okay? You may not like the way it's collected. I mean, you may not like that particular imposition, and that's what politics are all about. You can modify that, change that, but it's efficient, as opposed to a premium. Both of them serve the same purpose. I don't know if you're really interested in all this, but I'm going to.
Yes.
There are two parts to every healthcare system in the world. One part is collecting the money to pay for it, and the other part is the services. Medicare collects the money through a tax mechanism, pays for services in a variety of ways, from fee-for-service to, I don't know, Kaiser, okay? Managed care systems, everything in between. So you got the delivery side, and then you have the payment side, the collection of money and the payment. Medicare collects money. It doesn't hire a doctor directly. It pays fees for services or pays for a capitated system. Okay? The insurance industry collects money through a premium. Far less efficient. So where does the solution lie? Medicare for all? We talk about it? Yeah, it could work. How do you get there? How do you get there? Well, you can simply change two numbers. 65.
Zero.
Date of birth. Okay, that'll do it. But then you got to collect the money. And so instead of premiums, you would be collecting the money through some tax mechanism or another. Again, efficiency and effectiveness. Incidentally, Medicare has a nationwide universal coverage, not only for seniors, but for many people who are not seniors that have some sort of a disability. So it's already there. No pre-existing conditions. All you got to do is get to live till you're 65, bingo. You got universal, comprehensive, no pre-existing conditions, you're covered. Think about it. Think about it. For my most conservative Tea Party friends, think about it. Okay, we're going to go two more questions, and then Trump. You're going to set your arm out of is it a quick question? You're going to read that entire document. You're going to summarize it.
Quick question.
Good. Let's go with the quick question.
Okay.
Here you go. Take mine.
Thank you for expressing your support for Medicare for all. Just now, I would now like you to write op-eds for the Bee and other newspapers, specifically extolling the benefits of Medicare for all. And
I'll do that.
Oh, thank you. Also telling us how your district would benefit from Medicare for all.
Okay. I think we have these documents available to you. This one I didn't probably point out this one, but this is really what happens if the Affordable Care Act gets repealed and replaced. I mean, it's bad news. Premiums for people that are 60 years of age, Colusa County go from $5,000 to $14,000. Here's your $5,000 to $13,100. We've gone down that path. Okay, I'm going to end with Trump. And then you said this would be an hour and a half. I've worked up a sweat and you've been sitting. So here we go.
Impeachment.
How many of you were around, not reading history books, but were around for Watergate? Ooh. Okay. This is far more serious. Far, far more serious. Watergate, as they say, was a two-bit burglary and then a cover-up, and it resulted in the president leaving. This is about our fundamental democracy. And this is about our democracy and the ability of our democracy to function. Win or lose, but we do it ourselves without the influence of a foreign government. There's always, back and forth, people talking, but direct foreign intervention, in this case, by a theft of confidential information from the National Democratic Party, also from the DNCC, or the DCCC rather, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. I had to change all of my emails and everything else as a result of that theft, and the theft from Hillary's campaign manager. That's breaking a law. That law was broken by the Russian government. And then the Russian government used that money to change the direction of the national campaign. Now, the analysis has been done. Most people think it's tainted because it thinks it helps the Democrats. But you go back through this campaign beginning sometime in the summer, and you watch the flow of information over that period of time, there is absolutely no doubt that that theft of private information, which is a federal offense, it's a felony, was then weaponized to influence the outcome of the election. Now that's a fact. Was it consequential? You can debate that, and certainly Trump debates it. But there is no doubt that that took place. At a minimum, we have to put in place various safeguards and laws and penalties domestically, and to the extent that we can reach outside this country, to penalize individuals, corporations, or governments that engage in that activity. And it has to be tough, it has to be sure, and it has to be put into effect. Now, that's a minimum. The question of whether Trump, his campaign, or he, or whomever in his campaign enabled that is an open question. But I know that when I came into this room, there was a question about the Attorney General discussing these issues with Kislyak, the Russian master spy and ambassador in Washington, during the campaign. Well, we'll see. Kislyak said they talked about the campaign. Sessions says, well, we talked about things, but not about that. This next week, we're going to have at least two of the participants in that famous meeting in Trump Tower, in which the president's son said, "I love it," when he was offered information that would somehow denigrate Hillary Clinton. We'll see what comes of that. Was there collusion? Interesting point. We'll find out. And this is developing far more rapidly than any of us expected. Thirdly, is there a cover-up, or is there a, what's the right word to say? Is the president trying to stop the investigation? Obstruction of justice. Well, we'll see. There's certainly some indication that it has already happened. Mr. Comey got fired. We first thought because Sessions and the newly appointed Deputy Attorney General put forth a dossier that said that Comey was doing some things that went good. And therefore the president fired him. Until a couple of days later, the president fired him because he was messing around in this Russia thing. Well, there are plenty of people that would argue that that is prima facie evidence of obstruction of justice. Where does all this go? It goes to a major constitutional issue that I and my colleagues must address. Are these impeachable offenses? Getting awfully close. We'll see as the proof comes in. Is the House of Representatives ready to put forth an impeachment resolution? Not yet. Will we? We'll see how this develops. We'll see. Where does it go? It is in the context of the continuation of Trump as president. I think there's a very significant question that he will not serve 4 years because of this. I know that that's something you think may be good, but I want you to know this is a horrible crisis for the United States. For the United States to come to this situation again in something that is actually far, far more serious than Watergate is a real tragedy for this nation. Last week, the week of 4th of July, I know many of you thought I should have been in the parade here. I was, however, in Hanoi and South Korea. Actually, I was in Australia at 4th of July. We're looking at from the Armed Services Committee, the Pacific Rim, the issues that are in play there, the South China Sea, obviously North Korea and South Korea, all of those things. And the angst, the worry, the concern about what's happening to America. What's happening? We count on America. I mean, you know, we don't really perceive ourselves, I think, the way in which the rest of the world does. They count on the United States for many, many things. From their country's security is in case of Japan, South Korea, Australia, guaranteed by the United States. They count on us. They count on stability. They count on certainty. They need, and they don't see that in America today. The trade issues are another fundamental issue that they went, where in the world is the United States going on this issue? And on and on and on. The environmental issues. So the Trump issues are far more than the presidency. The Trump issues are really about the stability of this world at a profoundly dangerous time for a variety of reasons. North Korea, missiles and nuclear. South China Sea, Russia. Anybody pay attention? What happened in the Ukraine this week? What happened in the Ukraine this week is that the folks in Donbass declared an independent state. Whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What does that mean? Next week I'm going to be in Georgia, Romania, Poland, Lithuania. It's all about Russia. It's all about Russia. So this Trump thing is far more than whether you like the man and his policies, his tweets, or whatever. It's really, really about the stability of this world in which we live. There are more than enough people out there that are quite willing to push their envelope, given the instability, given the uncertainty, to push their particular edge, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whatever. What are we going to do in Afghanistan? 16 years of war. And another, I don't know, the last general there said, well, we're going to be here for a long time. How long is that? A long time. Really? That's why some of us, myself included, are saying, no. Walter Jones, a very conservative Republican from North Carolina, and I introduced a resolution saying that 180 days after this resolution becomes law, there is no more money for Afghanistan unless the House of Representatives and the Senate pass an authorization to use military force. You know, the definition of insanity,
Expecting different
we all know that. And so that's where we're headed, is, more of the same. Similarly, Syria and Iraq and all that's going on there. Kurdistan in September is voting for independence. Okay. Now, what does that do? Well, let's see. That carves an independent state out of Iraq. Kurds, Turkey. Kurdistan next door. We live in a complex world, and it's one in which I have found myself engaged in critical issues that affect all of our lives and really the lives of our children and grandchildren beyond, when you consider climate change, global warming, and all that comes with that. It's a great privilege and an incredible honor to represent the 3rd District and really the American public, and to try to wrestle with these very complex but extremely important policy issues. In order for me to do my job, I need to know where you think we are going. So many of you have come to the office from time to time. You've shared letters with us. You've told us that we ought to do this or that, and that's important to me. Maybe I agree, the gentleman in the back of the room, he and I disagree on tunnels, but it's a very, very important issue, and we've got to find a resolution to it. And somebody wrote this down. What are we going to talk about seniors and the repeal of the Affordable Care Act and the effect on seniors? Profound. A lot of what we talk about here, is that your question?
That was my question.
Yeah, it's there.
Long-term care.
Long-term care, Medicaid. Okay, this is the end of it.
I wrote the question.
You wrote the question.
The point I was making is that there's been very little discussion of the fact that the AHCA and Trump Care would effectively repeal funding that was put in the ACA to extend the solvency of Medicare, and nobody's really talking about it.
Actually, you ought to watch C-SPAN. When I do my special order hour on C-SPAN, I always talk about it. Another editorial. Yeah. Wrap it up this way. Next week, the Senate is going to take up this issue. If the Senate repeals the Affordable Care Act, the effect on all of the medical systems in the United States will be profoundly bad. All of them. From the private insurance companies, who will be totally unable to price their policies for the upcoming enrollment period in the fall. For senior citizens, Medicare solvency is reduced by at least 2 years, and quite possibly many, many more. The Affordable Care Act actually extended the solvencies of Medicare by putting in place a tax on the super wealthy that funded portions of Medicare. And finally, when they talk about Medicaid or Medi-Cal, most everybody thinks some welfare woman and their children, right? No, wrong. 60% across the nation of Medicaid, we call it Medi-Cal in California, and this is just about the same percentage, 60% of that money goes to seniors in nursing homes.
That's right.
So, we're not talking about a welfare program here. We're talking about care for seniors in nursing homes. You've been very patient. We said it'd be an hour and a half. We were just a little past that. I want to thank you so very, very much for coming. Keep in touch. Thank you so very, very much.